Chapter 1, The Fractured Scientist. Dr. Lyra Voss had spent her life chasing time, only to find herself running out of it. The chronocore pulsed erratically in the dimly lit underground lab, casting eerie shadows across the tangle of wires, shattered glass, and obsolete schematics strewn across the metallic floor. The facility, once the pinnacle of chronoscience, now stood abandoned, condemned by the very council that had once praised her genius. But Lyra wasn't done yet. Her hands trembled as she typed furiously into the console, sweat dripping down her temple despite the chilled air. She had designed the chronocore to stabilize temporal fractures, to mend the scars reckless time manipulation had left on history. Yet, tonight, something had changed. The readings were wrong. The data feeds flickered with anomalies she couldn't explain, and then the chronocore howled. A shockwave pulsed outward, knocking Lyra off her feet. Sparks erupted from the control panel as a fissure of pure energy split the air before her. It wasn't supposed to do this. She scrambled up, reaching for the emergency kill switch, but the system rejected her override. A warning flashed across the cracked screen. External entity detected. Unauthorized temporal merger in progress. No, Lyra muttered, fingers flying over the keys. Someone or something was hijacking her chronocore, using it as a bridge to force timelines together. Her mind raced. Only a handful of people had access to the core's schematics, and even fewer had the intellect to manipulate it. The Time Council had branded her a heretic, stripping her of her credentials and sealing off her research. Had one of them stolen her work? Or worse, was this the work of the Time Devourer itself? The thought sent ice through her veins. She turned back to the portal, now widening, distorting the air like a wound torn in the fabric of existence. Through the rift, she glimpsed something impossible. No, someone. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a mane of unkempt hair and a beard that framed his fierce expression. He wore fur-lined armor, his body scarred from a life of battle. His eyes, sharp and wild, locked onto hers as if he could see through time itself. And then, before she could react, he was yanked forward, ripped from whatever past he belonged to, and hurled into her lab. The Viking had arrived. Ragnar Ironhide, the berserker of the fjords. Ragnar Ironhide felt his stomach lurch as the world twisted around him. One moment, he was in the middle of a raid, axe clashing against steel, the roar of his warband filling his ears. The next, he was falling through a void, weightless, surrounded by incomprehensible lights and shadows. Then, with a violent thud, he landed on cold metal. He rolled instinctively, reaching for his axe. His fingers found the weapon's familiar handle, and he surged to his feet, muscles tensed for battle. But there was no enemy before him, only a strange woman in strange clothes, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. Ragnar's grip on his axe tightened. "Where is this place?" His voice was rough, thick with the accent of his native tongue. "Who are you?" Lyra's heart pounded. She had expected a disaster, but not like this. This man, this warrior, was ripped straight from the past. She recognized the Norse markings on his armor, the battle-worn axe, the braided beard. He was from the 9th century, a time far removed from her own. She raised her hands, trying to appear non-threatening. "Listen to me. You're safe, but you're not where you think you are. This is the year 3023. Ragnar narrowed his eyes. "Lies." Before she could react, he lunged. The clash of ages. The fight was short but brutal. Ragnar's speed was staggering for a man of his size, his axe slicing through the air with deadly precision. Lyra barely managed to dodge, throwing herself behind a console. She reached for the pulse emitter on her belt and fired a concussive blast. The energy struck Ragnar square in the chest, sending him crashing against the wall. He grunted, dazed but still conscious. Lyra sucked in a breath, keeping the emitter aimed at him. "I don't want to hurt you, but you need to listen. You've been pulled out of your time. Someone is tampering with history, and I need to stop it before more damage is done." Ragnar groaned, pushing himself up. His mind reeled. He had heard tales of magic and gods, of Loki's tricks and Odin's wisdom, but this was something else entirely. Finally, he spat blood onto the floor and nodded. "Speak, woman. Tell me what sorcery this is." Lyra exhaled in relief, lowering her weapon. "Not sorcery. Science. And if we don't fix this, both your time and mine will cease to exist." The chronocore pulsed again. The fissure widened. And from its depths, Another figure emerged. The past and future were colliding, and this was only the beginning. The rogue AI hacker. Lyra quickly checked the core's stabilizer output, already past safe levels. If the rift didn't close soon, entire timelines could unravel. But before she could act, the second arrival took shape. A shadow moved within the rift, flickering in and out of visibility, caught between collapsing time waves. Lyra's stomach clenched. The figure stepped forward. A woman, clad in a sleek, armored bodysuit, eyes glowing with an unnatural blue. Data flickered across her forearm display as she analyzed the scene. She locked eyes with Lyra and Ragnar. "Well," she said, voice tinged with artificial modulation. "Looks like I arrived just in time." Lyra's breath hitched. She knew that face. Knew it too well. "Zara," she whispered. The rogue AI hacker had arrived one step ahead, as always. The first battle of the timeline war. Zara took in the situation with calculated ease, scanning the lab's damage and Ragnar's primitive weapon. "Time fractures everywhere," she muttered. "And you? You're the one who built this mess." Lyra bristled. "I was trying to stabilize anomalies, not create them." Zara gave a wry grin. "Yeah? Well, it looks like someone else is playing with time strings now. And it's not just some rogue scientist." Ragnar grunted. "The gods do not weave such madness." Zara rolled her eyes. "It's not gods, Viking. It's something far worse." Lyra's heart clenched. She already knew the answer, but she forced herself to ask. "The Time Devourer?" Zara's expression turned grim. "Yeah. And it just made its first move." Silence settled over the ruined lab, broken only by the soft hum of the still active chrono core. Lyra straightened, determination returning to her eyes. "Then we stop it." Ragnar gripped his axe, his gaze unwavering. "Then we fight." Zara smirked. "Then we hack time itself." And with that, the first battle of the timeline war began. Chapter 2, A Viking Out of Time. Ragnar Ironhide had fought in countless battles, but none like this. The air smelled wrong, sharp and metallic instead of salt and earth. The walls weren't stone or wood but cold metal, humming with an unnatural energy. Strange blue lights pulsed along the floor like glowing veins, and machines that whispered in an unknown tongue surrounded him. This was no battlefield. This was sorcery. Yet, the woman before him claimed it was science. Ragnar clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his axe, the only thing familiar in this bizarre world. He had been yanked from his time, torn from the battlefield where he had been fighting to claim his place in Valhalla. And now, instead of feasting with Odin, he stood here lost in a land of metal and light. "Are you going to keep staring?" Zara drawled, arms crossed, "or do you need a software update?" Ragnar's eyes snapped to her. The second woman, dressed in a tight-fitting armored suit, was unlike any warrior he had seen. She carried no blade, yet something in her stance, in the glow of her strange blue eyes, told him she was dangerous. Lyra sighed, stepping between them. "Zara, stop. He's still processing." Zara smirked. "Processing? He looks like he wants to cleave me in half." Ragnar grunted, keeping his grip firm on his axe. "If I wished to strike you, you would already be dead." Zara whistled. "Oh, I like him. He's got that old-school barbarian charm." Lyra shot her a glare before turning back to Ragnar. "Listen. I know this is overwhelming. You were taken from your time because something is wrong with history. If we don't fix it, your world, my world, every world will collapse." Ragnar's nostrils flared. "You expect me to believe this? You just walked through a hole in time," Zara said. "What more proof do you need?" Ragnar's jaw tightened. She had a point. The rift, the unnatural fall, the way the world had shifted around him, none of it had been a dream. And these women, though strange, did not seem like liars. Still, a warrior did not abandon caution so easily. He pointed his axe at Lyra. "You claim to know what has happened." Lyra nodded. "Yes. Then you will prove it." Lyra frowned. "How?" Ragnar smirked. "Send me back. A rift beyond repair." Silence hung between them. Lyra exhaled sharply, running a hand through her short auburn hair. She had expected this demand, but it didn't make answering it any easier. She glanced at the chrono core, still pulsing erratically, its energy signatures fluctuating wildly. The rift that had pulled Ragnar through was not natural. It wasn't something she had opened or controlled, it had been hijacked by something else. Something powerful. I can't, she admitted. Not yet. Ragnar's fingers tightened around his axe. Then you are a fraud. Zara scoffed. Wow. Talk about gratitude. The woman saves your Viking butt from being atomized by unstable time waves, and you call her a fraud. Ragnar shot her a glare. A warrior does not rely on witchcraft. Zara threw up her hands. Oh, for the love of it's not witchcraft, it's technology. Do you know what a quantum destabilizer is? Ragnar raised an eyebrow. Zara smirked. Exactly. So maybe shut up and let the smart people work. Lyra held up a hand before Ragnar could react. Enough. Both of you. She turned back to Ragnar, her expression calm but firm. I am not lying to you. Right now, the chrono core is unstable, which means no one is going anywhere. The only way to fix this is to find out who tampered with it and why. Ragnar studied her. There was conviction in her voice, the kind of determination he had only seen in warriors before battle. She believed what she was saying. That did not mean he trusted her. But he would listen. For now. A new battlefield. Minutes later, Ragnar found himself standing on the rooftop of a city unlike anything he had ever seen. The sky was black, not from nightfall, but from the sheer number of towering metal structures that loomed overhead. They blinked with lights of unnatural color, stretching beyond the clouds. The streets below were rivers of light, filled with strange, humming beasts that moved too fast to be real. No trees. No fields. No mountains. Only cold, soulless steel. Ragnar scowled. This is no land of men. This is the realm of the gods. Zara snorted. More like the realm of corporate greed and questionable life choices. Lyra ignored them, staring at the digital billboard across the street. It flickered with holographic images, advertising a sleek, shadowy figure with the words Omnitech Corporation, shaping the future of time. Her stomach twisted. Omnitech. The largest and most dangerous time tech conglomerate in the world. Ragnar followed her gaze. What is this? Lyra's fists clenched. The enemy. The hunt begins. Inside the heart of the city, Omnitech's headquarters loomed like a fortress of glass and steel. Lyra stared at it from a distance, running calculations in her head. If anyone had the resources to tamper with the chrono core, it was them. But she needed proof. And proof meant breaking in. Ragnar crossed his arms. We storm the gates. Zara raised an eyebrow. Oh, sure. Let's just walk into the most heavily secured building on the planet. That's a great plan. Ragnar frowned. You have a better one. Zara grinned. As a matter of fact, yeah. We hack the system. Ragnar blinked. Hack. Lyra sighed. She means infiltrate. Silently. Ragnar scoffed. A warrior does not skulk in the shadows. Zara smirked. Well, you're about to. Breaking into Omnitech. The plan was simple. Zara would breach Omnitech's security grid, disabling the external alarms. Lyra would access the mainframe, searching for files on the chrono core heist. Ragnar would stand there looking scary. Ragnar hated this plan. But if it got him closer to answers, he would endure it. They moved swiftly through the underground access tunnels, bypassing automated sentries and laser grids. Zara worked her tech magic, disabling cameras with surgical precision. Lyra navigated the blueprints in her head, leading them through the maze of corridors. Then, just as they reached the mainframe chamber, an alarm blared. Zara froze. That wasn't me. The walls shifted. Turrets descended from the ceiling. Lyra's eyes widened. It's a trap. A door burst open and they came. Omnitech enforcers, clad in black exosuits, wielding pulse rifles and energy blades. Ragnar grinned. Finally. With a roar, he charged. The first battle of the New Age. The fight was chaos. Chapter 3, War on the Timeline. The room pulsed with dying red lights, flickering like the embers of a battlefield long since abandoned. Smoke curled from the shattered control panels, the air thick with the acrid scent of burned circuits and blood. Ragnar Ironhide stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, his axe slick with the oil-black blood of Omnitech's enforcers. Lyra Voss barely had time to process what she had read. The Time Devourer has awakened. The words burned into her mind like an old scar being reopened. She swallowed hard. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't have been possible. The Time Devourer was a myth, a cautionary tale whispered among the most secretive circles of chrono-scientists and historians. The idea that a singular entity could consume the very essence of time itself, that was madness. And yet, the data before her said otherwise. Zara crouched beside the ruined security console, typing rapidly on a sleek wrist-mounted device, her electric blue eyes flickering as they interfaced with the system. Yeah, so, I don't wanna be the bearer of even more bad news, but I think we just pissed off the wrong people. Lyra tore her gaze away from the terminal. What do you mean? Zara turned her screen toward her, showing a rapidly scrolling feed of security logs. Red warning symbols flashed across the interface. Omnitech just locked this facility down. All exits are sealed. Oh, and in about 5 minutes, a corporate death squad is gonna bust in here and turn us into very expensive meat paste. Ragnar scowled. Let them come. Lyra ignored him, her mind racing. We can't stay here. We need an exit now. Zara exhaled sharply. Yeah, well, good luck with that. Only way out is through the front door, and that's... A distant explosion cut her off. The walls trembled. The floor shuddered beneath them, sending loose metal and debris clattering. The automated lights flickered, then failed entirely, plunging the room into pitch darkness. Then, in the silence, a voice cold, mechanical, and inhuman echoed through the facility's speakers. Intruders detected. Timeline breach recorded. Initiating containment protocol. Lyra's stomach dropped. Containment? Ragnar rumbled. What does that mean? A deep hum resonated through the walls. Lyra turned sharply, eyes widening. It means we're about to be erased from history. The countdown to oblivion. A low, vibrating thrum filled the chamber, growing in intensity. Lyra recognized it immediately, a chronopulse wave, a failsafe used by high-security time research facilities. If Omnitech couldn't stop an intrusion, they would erase the entire event from the timeline. The facility wasn't just going to self-destruct. It was going to cease existing altogether. Lyra spun toward Zara. Can you shut it down? Zara was already moving, fingers dancing across her device. Maybe. Probably not. But I'll try. Ragnar turned to Lyra. And if she fails? Lyra gritted her teeth. Then we disappear. Ragnar smirked. I have fought many battles. But never against time itself. Zara snorted. Yeah? Well, time doesn't care about your axe, Viking. A metallic grinding noise echoed through the halls. The containment doors were sliding open, revealing a swirling vortex of shifting energy. Beyond it, the world bent and twisted, as if reality itself was being rewritten. Lyra's pulse hammered in her throat. If they got pulled into that, they wouldn't just die. They would be erased. Zara, she shouted. Working on it. Zara snapped. The vortex began pulling at the room, dragging loose debris toward its gaping maw. A lifeless Omnitech soldier's body was the first to be caught, his armored form yanked violently into the rift. He disintegrated before he even reached the event horizon. Ragnar dug his heels in, gripping his axe tighter. If you have a plan, now would be the time. Zara let out a triumphant yell. Ha! Got it. The vortex shimmered, hesitating for a fraction of a second, then, with a deafening boom, it collapsed inward, imploding into a pinpoint of white-hot light before vanishing completely. Silence. Zara exhaled sharply. Holy hell, I am so good at this. Lyra wiped sweat from her brow. You cut the failsafe. Hell no, Zara said, standing up and stretching. I just reprogrammed it. Lyra frowned. Reprogrammed it how? Zara smirked. Instead of erasing us, I told it to erase all the security footage of us being here. Lyra blinked. Ragnar gave an approving chuckle. A clever tactic. Zara grinned. I know, right? Man, I am. The ceiling exploded. The arrival of the warlord. The force of the blast sent all three of them sprawling. Debris rained down in a cascade of metal and fire, the floor cracking beneath the impact. A figure descended through the smoke, a hulking, armored shape, landing with a thunderous crash. As the dust settled, Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The warlord stood over 7 feet tall, clad in obsidian black cybernetic armor that pulsed with violet energy veins. His helmet, sleek and smooth, bore no face, only a burning red visor that seemed to stare into the souls of everyone before him. Ragnar gripped his axe. Zara froze, eyes wide. Lyra whispered in horror. No. The warlord tilted his head slightly, a predatory motion. Then, his booming, synthetic voice echoed through the ruined chamber. Chrono warriors detected. Surrender the core. Ragnar lunged. A battle across centuries. Ragnar struck first, his axe swinging in a deadly arc. The warlord caught it with one hand. For the first time in his life, Ragnar felt something stronger than him. The warlord lifted him off the ground, hurling him across the chamber like a ragdoll. Ragnar slammed into a steel pillar, the impact leaving a crater. He groaned but did not fall. A warrior did not fall so easily. Zara unleashed a hacking surge, her fingertips crackling with blue energy as she fired a pulse of raw cybernetic disruption. The warlord barely reacted. Instead, he raised his arm and time itself bent around him. Zara's energy blast froze midair, then reversed, surging back at her in a blinding arc. Zara barely dodged, her boots skidding across the ruined floor. That's so unfair. Lyra reached for the chrono core, knowing it was the only weapon they had. She needed to do something, anything. Then the warlord turned to her. Time slowed. His visor pulsed. For a fraction of a second, Lyra saw someone within that helmet. A face she knew. Her heart stopped. Hero. The warlord's visor flashed violently, then, with a roar of pure energy, he lunged straight at her. Chapter 4, The Rogue Hacker and the Devourer's Truth. A glimpse into the abyss. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The warlord's charge was instantaneous. One moment, he was yards away, the next, he was nearly on top of her. Time itself seemed to bend, his very existence a distortion in the fabric of reality. The sheer gravitational force of his presence made her feel as if she were standing at the edge of a black hole. Yet, just before he struck, boom! A blast of hacking energy erupted from Zara's palm, striking the warlord's visor point blank. The cybernetic titan staggered, his armored form flickering, as if his entire body were an image on a screen suffering from severe interference. The violet energy veins across his armor pulsed erratically, and for a brief moment, just a fraction of a second, Lyra saw it again. The face beneath the mask. Hero. She gasped. It's him. The warlord let out a metallic growl, shoving back against the pulse of Zara's attack. Zara grimaced. Whatever you're seeing, Doc, now's not the time to. The warlord moved again, his entire body phasing forward in a sudden burst of temporal energy. Ragnar intercepted him, swinging his axe in a horizontal arc meant to cleave straight through his chest. The warlord caught the blade in one hand. Ragnar snarled, pushing with every ounce of strength he had, but the warlord simply twisted his wrist and Ragnar's axe shattered like glass. For the first time, Ragnar stumbled back. The warlord raised his arm, violet energy coalescing into a pulsing orb in his palm. He was going to erase them. Lyra's mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way. Then, the entire facility shook violently, as if an earthquake had struck. Something massive had just entered the time stream. The warlord froze, his head snapping toward the ceiling. Then, without another word, he vanished, collapsing into a singularity of pure darkness and blinking out of existence. Silence. Then, Zara exhaled. Okay. What the actual hell just happened? The shadows of time. They didn't wait around to find out. Lyra, Ragnar, and Zara escaped the Omnitech facility through a ruined service tunnel, emerging into the neon-lit underbelly of 3023's urban sprawl. The city was a massive, layered monstrosity, a labyrinth of towering structures that extended both into the sky and deep beneath the earth, woven together by a network of aerial traffic, magnetic highways, and holographic advertisements flickering against the smog-filled sky. Zara led them into a crumbling sector of the city, a forgotten district erased from official records, where the remnants of hacked AI constructs and rogue programs drifted like ghosts through the ruins. They took refuge in a hacked-out bunker, hidden beneath the remains of an old cyber temple, its walls lined with illicit data caches and tech relics from across history. Only then did Lyra finally collapse into a chair, her hands trembling. Zara tossed her jacket aside, rolling her shoulders. All right. Someone start talking. Because I just got my mind fried hacking into whatever the hell that thing was back there. Lyra swallowed. It was Hero. Ragnar frowned. The samurai? The one you spoke of? She nodded. But that doesn't make sense. Hero died. He died in another time. Zara flexed her fingers, pulling up a holographic display from her wrist-mounted device. Yeah, well, I don't know about all that, but I dug into his data signature when I hit him with the pulse. She enlarged the projection, a massive code sequence, infinitely complex and interwoven with temporal distortions. This is not normal, she said. It's like his entire existence is being rewritten in real time. Something is forcing him to exist, even though he shouldn't. Lyra's mind reeled. She stared at the shifting code, her breath shallow. Then that means... Zara's eyes narrowed. Yeah. Whatever brought Hero back, it's connected to the Time Devourer. Ragnar grunted. Then we hunt it. Zara exhaled sharply, running a hand through her short, messy hair. Yeah, see, small problem this thing. It doesn't just exist in one place or one time. It's everywhere. It's a parasite latched onto history itself. She flicked through the data, highlighting a pattern buried deep in the code. But I did find something. A signal. A fixed point in time where the Devourer's influence is strongest. She turned to Lyra. It's in 1603 Japan. A journey to the past. The decision was made. They would have to travel back to 1603, the early Edo period, a time of warlords, shifting alliances, and deadly assassins. If the Devourer's influence was anchored there, it meant something important was happening in that era. Lyra, however, couldn't shake her unease. Hero had died saving them. He had been a warrior, an ally, a friend. But the thing they had fought tonight? That wasn't him anymore. And if the Devourer could bring back the dead, what else could it do? The portal opens. Zara finished calibrating the chrono core, linking its energy signature to the temporal coordinates of Edo period Japan. The core pulsed, its ethereal glow casting ghostly shadows across the bunker walls. Ragnar strapped a new weapon to his back, a twin-bladed axe, crafted from a fusion of Viking steel and modern alloys, scavenged from Zara's arsenal. Lyra checked the temporal stabilizers, ensuring they wouldn't be ripped apart in the jump. Zara, of course, just cracked her knuckles and smirked. All right, kiddos. Let's go commit some historical violations. The portal ignited, swirling with unstable energy. They stepped forward and vanished into 1603. Chapter 5, Blades of the Past. Arrival in 1603. The world twisted, the fabric of time unraveling around them. The chrono core vibrated violently as it tore through the barriers between centuries. Lyra felt her stomach lurch, her vision warping between flashes of past, present, and futures that had never been. Then, silence. The air was thick with the scent of pine, incense, and distant fire. A chill wind carried the echoes of cicadas and the distant clang of a forging hammer against steel. They had arrived. Lyra stumbled forward, her boots sinking into the damp earth. She scanned their surroundings, a dense bamboo forest, illuminated by the soft glow of paper lanterns hung along a dirt path leading toward a looming mountainside castle in the distance. Ragnar grunted, gripping his new twin-bladed axe. Smells like a battlefield waiting to happen. Zara adjusted her jacket, shaking off the disorientation. And here I thought cyberpunk dystopias were rough. Where the hell are we exactly? Lyra pulled out her time tracker, the device flickering with unstable readings. Edo period Japan. 1603. This is the dawn of the Tokugawa shogunate. Feudal warlords were still consolidating power. Zara glanced up at the castle in the distance. So let me guess. We're heading toward that creepy murder palace, huh? Lyra exhaled, tightening her grip on the chrono core. If the Time Devourer is influencing this period, that's where we'll find it. Ragnar cracked his neck. Then let's move. The samurai's arrival. They hadn't taken more than a dozen steps when a figure emerged from the mist ahead. A samurai. He was clad in black armor, accented with red sigils, an omen of death in feudal Japan. His helmet bore a sharp, demonic visage, his mask covering all but his eyes, which glowed faintly with an unnatural light. A katana rested at his hip, its blade humming with an energy Lyra didn't recognize. The warrior stood motionless, barring their path. Then, shhhnk. The blade left its sheath in a flash, too fast for Lyra's eyes to follow. Ragnar barely managed to react, crossing his twin axes just in time to catch the strike. Sparks erupted as the weapons clashed, sending a shockwave through the air. Zara cursed. Seriously? Can we go anywhere without someone trying to kill us? The samurai leapt back, his movements unnaturally fluid. He tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing them. Then he spoke. You carry the scent of ghosts. His voice was deep, edged with something ancient and sorrowful. Ragnar spat to the side. I carry the scent of battle, warrior. Now stand aside, or I'll carve my way through you. The samurai did not move. Instead, he placed his hand on the hilt of his sword once more. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding. Wait. We're not your enemy. The samurai's eyes locked onto hers. You wield a power that does not belong here. Lyra hesitated. Was he talking about the Chrono Core? The samurai exhaled. Come with me. Before they find you. They? Zara asked warily. The samurai turned his gaze toward the distant castle. The ones who have already crossed the threshold of time. A war between eras. The samurai led them through the winding bamboo forest, his steps silent as a shadow. As they walked, Lyra noticed the distortions, small rips in reality, like cracks in glass, flickering with glimpses of other timelines bleeding through. She caught fleeting images of cybernetic samurai, of floating meshes, of soldiers with laser rifles clashing against warriors on horseback. The Devourer's influence was growing here. We need to stop this before history collapses, she muttered. Zara sighed. Yeah, well, tell that to our new cryptic swordsman friend. She turned to the samurai. Speaking of which, mind telling us who you actually are? The warrior glanced at her, then removed his mask. Lyra froze. She knew that face. Hero. Or rather, a version of him. A younger hero, untouched by the horrors of time. Her chest tightened. Hero. The samurai narrowed his eyes. How do you know my name? Zara groaned. Oh, this is about to get real awkward, real fast. The weave of fate. They explained everything. Or rather, as much as they could explain. That hero had fought beside them. That he had died. That some dark force had resurrected him as the warlord they battled in the future. Hero's expression remained unreadable as he listened. Finally, he exhaled. If what you say is true, then the one responsible for this lies within that castle. Lyra frowned. You sound like you already know who's behind this. Hero's gaze darkened. A man who should not exist in this era. Zara crossed her arms. Let me guess, another time traveler. Hero nodded. He calls himself the Weaver King. A warlord who has conquered not just lands, but time itself. Lyra's blood ran cold. The Weaver King. Her husband. The man she had once loved, before he had become a monster. Her grip on the Chrono Core tightened. Then we end this. Tonight. Hero nodded. Then prepare yourselves. The war for time begins now. Chapter 6, The Devourer's Design. Storming the castle. The sky above the Tokugawa stronghold churned with an unnatural storm, lightning flickering in eerie shades of purple and blue, colors that didn't belong in this century. The very air vibrated with the weight of paradox. Time itself was unraveling. Hero, his face grim, led the group through the underbrush, approaching the castle from the western ridge. Lyra's fingers clenched the Chrono Core, feeling its pulse sinking with the anomalies surrounding them. This place was a wound in history, and the Time Devourer's influence was festering within it. Ragnar crouched beside her, resting a hand on his axe. We're walking into a battlefield. We always are, Zara muttered, scanning the area with her hollow goggles. The readout was a mess of conflicting data, multiple timelines overlapping, creating a ghostly mirage of futures and pasts. The castle flickered, one moment a fortress of wood and stone, the next a monolithic steel citadel, and then something else entirely, a shape Lyra couldn't comprehend. Hero placed a hand on the hilt of his katana, exhaling slowly. The Weaver King waits inside. The name sent a sharp pang through Lyra's chest. Her husband. Or rather, the man he had become, a ruler not of an empire, but of fractured time itself. She forced herself to focus. If the Devourer's presence is here, then we don't have much time. The more the timelines bleed together, the closer we get to total collapse. Zara smirked. Then let's get in there before the universe decides to fold in on itself. Shadows of the past. The castle was eerily silent as they infiltrated the outer grounds. No guards. No torches. Only the distant hum of something unnatural. As they advanced through the empty corridors, Ragnar's grip tightened on his axe. This doesn't feel right. Hero nodded. A castle of this size should be heavily guarded. Unless. Before he could finish, the walls shuddered. The air grew heavy, like the weight of an unseen hand pressing down on them. Then, a figure materialized from the shadows. At first, Lyra thought it was a reflection, but the truth was far worse. The man stepping forward was Hero. But not the hero who stood beside them. This one was older, his armor fractured and reforged with obsidian and circuitry, his eyes glowing with a spectral blue fire. His katana was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen, a blade of pure temporal distortion, shifting between liquid steel and raw energy. The resurrected warlord. The hero they had lost in a different time. Zara swore under her breath. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Hero's past self clenched his jaw. "What am I looking at?" The warlord's voice was hollow, reverberating through the corridor. A future that never should have been. Ragnar stepped forward, rolling his shoulders. "Then let's make sure it never happens." With a warrior's cry, he charged. A battle across time. The two heroes clashed, their blades meeting in an explosion of light and raw power. The shockwave sent dust and debris flying, forcing Lyra and the others to back away. Future Hero's movements were inhumanly fast, his attacks flowing like water through time, phasing between present and past. Every time present Hero blocked, it was as if he was defending against strikes that had already happened. Ragnar roared, bringing his axe down in a thunderous arc. The warlord twisted impossibly, the axe barely grazing his shoulder before he vanished, reappearing behind Ragnar in a blink. A blade flashed. Blood sprayed the walls. Ragnar stumbled, a deep gash cut across his side. Damn it! Lyra activated the chrono core, attempting to disrupt the warlord's temporal signature. The device pulsed, but a glitch in time sent her reeling. For a split second, she saw herself in another timeline, standing in the same corridor but alone, her allies gone, the walls crumbling into an endless void. No. Not yet. She wrenched herself back to the present, breath ragged. The warlord moved to strike again, but Zara was faster. She fired a high-voltage disruptor round, aimed directly at his temporal core, the unstable energy sustaining him. The warlord phased, but the round clipped his shoulder. He staggered. It was enough. Hero lunged, driving his katana through his future self's chest. The warlord froze, looking down at the blade, his own blade piercing his armor. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the warlord exhaled, his voice barely a whisper. "And this." His form flickered, unraveled, then vanished into streams of dissolving time. Present Hero lowered his sword, his face emotionless. "I will not become that." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll make sure you don't." The Devourer's reach. Before they could catch their breath, a rumble shook the castle. Zara checked her hollow goggles. We've got bigger problems." The walls cracked, revealing glowing veins of raw temporal energy, pulsing like exposed nerves. The castle was no longer just a structure, it was a machine. Lyra's stomach twisted. "This whole place, it's a conduit." Then, a voice echoed through the corridors. "You finally see, my love." She froze. The Weaver King stood at the far end of the hall. Tall, draped in robes woven from unraveling time itself, his face still achingly familiar, but his eyes hollow, infinite, filled with galaxies that never existed. The storm outside grew worse. The castle was no longer part of one timeline, it was a fracture point, an anchor for the Devourer to consume this reality. Lyra clenched her fists. "This ends tonight." The Weaver King smiled. "Yes. It does." Chapter 7, Echoes of the Weaver King. A past that won't die. The castle's foundation trembled as the Weaver King stepped forward, his robes flowing like liquid dusk, embroidered with the shifting threads of fractured time. His face was a paradox of familiarity and distortion, like a memory decayed by centuries of regret. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had prepared for this moment. Rehearsed 1,000 possibilities in her mind. Yet standing here, face to face with the man who had once been her husband, her resolve faltered. Elias, the name escaped her lips before she could stop it. The Weaver King tilted his head. "That name belongs to a man long dead." "No," Lyra whispered, stepping forward. "He's still in there. Somewhere beneath all this." She gestured at the roiling mass of unstable time energy rippling around his form. Ragnar scowled, gripping his axe. "Doesn't look like it to me." Hero tightened his stance, katana gleaming under the flickering torchlight. "Lyra, this isn't the man you loved. We can't afford hesitation." Zara scoffed. Yeah, because hesitation gets us eaten by time monsters. The Weaver King chuckled, a sound both human and cosmic, his voice layered with echoes of past and future. Oh, Lyra. His smile was laced with something akin to sorrow, or perhaps condescension. You still don't understand. I was never taken. I chose this. A pulse of temporal distortion radiated outward, making the walls melt and reform, shifting from a cybernetic war room to a 16th century Edo chamber to an ancient Roman temple in the span of seconds. The castle was breaking apart across infinite eras. Lyra clenched her fists. No. You wouldn't. The Weaver King raised a hand, and the air itself screamed. In an instant, they weren't standing in the castle anymore. A memory that shouldn't exist. They were in a lab. Lyra's old lab. The sterile glow of hollow screens flickered against the walls, illuminating stacks of data drives, quantum stabilizers, and the unmistakable hum of the original chrono core, resting in its containment field. Lyra's stomach dropped. This was the day it all went wrong. A child's voice rang out, soft, innocent, full of wonder. Mama. Lyra whirled around, and her heart stopped. Standing there, small hands clutching the edge of a console, was a girl no older than 8, her brown curls bouncing as she tilted her head curiously. Lyra's breath hitched. Ren. It wasn't possible. Ren was gone. Lost in the experiment that had broken time and shattered Lyra's life. And yet, here she was. Alive. Real. The Weaver King stepped beside her, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. You see, Lyra? This is what I offer. His voice was softer now, almost pleading. A world where you never had to lose her. Lyra's pulse pounded in her ears. No. This is a trick. Her mind warred against her heart, logic screaming that this couldn't be real. Ren had been erased by the temporal collapse. And yet, the girl was looking at her with the same wide-eyed wonder as she had all those years ago. Could this be real? Could she have her daughter back? Zara grabbed her arm. Lyra, don't. The illusion fractured. Ren's image flickered, and for a brief, horrifying second, Lyra saw something else. A hollow-eyed husk. A being caught between realities. Ren's smile never changed, but her eyes. They weren't human anymore. Lyra staggered back. The Weaver King's expression darkened. You were always too stubborn. With a flick of his wrist, the lab shattered, reality snapping back to the present. The castle's throne room. The moment Lyra's feet hit the ground, pain exploded in her skull. The cost of knowing. She gasped, her knees hitting the black marble floor. Zara and Hero were panting, clearly affected by the forced temporal shift. Ragnar had braced himself against a pillar, his axe embedded in the stone. The Weaver King towered over them, eyes burning with infinite knowledge. You could have had everything, Lyra. His voice carried no malice, only the weight of a god who pitted those beneath him. Lyra forced herself to stand. Everything. She met his gaze, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You mean a prison of fabricated time? A world built on stolen moments? The Weaver King sighed, shaking his head. You are blind. A wave of force slammed into her, sending her skidding across the floor. Hero barely managed to deflect the second wave with his katana, the blade shuddering against the unnatural force. Zara gritted her teeth. Screw this. She yanked a device from her belt, a hacking rig linked to the chrono core. She jammed it into the castle's energy matrix. Reality convulsed. The fortress glitched, struggling to maintain its form. The Weaver King's face twisted in rage. What have you done? Zara smirked. Hit Ctrl plus Alt plus Delete on your little playground. The castle collapsed inward, its temporal fabric rupturing. The Weaver King's form flickered, weakened. Lyra surged forward, gripping the chrono core tight. This was their chance. She looked at Hero and Ragnar. We need to cut him off from the Devourer. Now. Hero nodded, stepping into a battle stance. Ragnar lifted his axe. I'll hold the bastard off. Just tell me where to swing. Zara's hollow goggles lit up. Give me 10 seconds to disrupt his chrono link. Lyra clenched her fists. Then let's end this. The Weaver King's shattered reality cracked around them. The battle for time had truly begun. Chapter 8, The Riftborn Axe. A warrior's burden. The battlefield was unraveling around them. Time itself had become fluid, distorting into shifting landscapes. One moment they stood in the Weaver King's shattered fortress, the next, they were knee-deep in a Viking raid, swords clashing under a blood-red sky. Then, in a blink, they stood upon a steel platform in the neon glow of 3023, with hovercrafts screaming overhead. Ragnar Ironhide did not falter. He had spent his life in the heart of battle, and whether he was fighting beneath Odin's gaze or on some twisted battlefield of collapsing time, he knew one thing remained constant: war. His hands tightened around the Riftborn Axe. A weapon that had followed him across centuries. A weapon that, until now, he had never questioned. But as he swung it against the Weaver King's temporal distortions, something changed. The axe sang. Not with metal against flesh. Not with steel against steel. But with the howl of the infinite. Each strike left behind rips in reality, fissures that showed glimpses of other lives, other timelines. He saw himself not as a Viking raider, but as a Roman gladiator, standing in the Colosseum. Then as a Mongol warrior, galloping under the banner of Genghis Khan. Then as a French resistance fighter, firing into the night as Nazi spotlights cut through the smoke. His heart pounded. This axe, his lifeblood, his legacy, had never been his at all. It had existed in all timelines, carried by different versions of himself, across different epochs. It was not merely a weapon. It was a key. The chains of fate. Ragnar. Lyra's voice cut through the haze. He snapped back to the present, if such a word still held meaning. The battlefield had stabilized into a storm-torn wasteland, the ground fractured by molten time energy. The Weaver King stood at the center, his form cracking like porcelain under the weight of Zara's sabotage. His chrono threads flickered, no longer stable, his form shifting between human and something monstrous. Zara wiped sweat from her brow. He's losing control, but not fast enough. Hero narrowed his eyes. Then we push harder. The samurai rushed forward, his katana gleaming with charged energy, ready to strike down the false king. The Weaver King snapped his fingers. Time stopped. Hero's momentum froze in midair, his blade inches from the king's chest. The Weaver King turned his gaze to Ragnar. You see it now, don't you? Ragnar's fingers tightened around the axe. See what? He growled. The Weaver King's lips curled into a knowing smile. Your fate. And then he showed him the lives he never lived. Ragnar wasn't on the battlefield anymore. He was in a dimly lit longhouse, firelight flickering against wooden beams. A woman stood before him, her belly swollen with child, her expression one of quiet love and sorrow. Why must you go? She whispered. Ragnar's throat tightened. He knew this place. Knew her. She was his wife. His real wife. The one he had left behind when time stole him away. But that wasn't possible. She reached out, brushing his cheek. You could stay, you know. The Riftborn Axe felt heavy in his hands. A weight not of metal, but of choice. Behind his wife, time fractured again. Now he stood in a stone-walled fortress, a crown upon his brow, his warriors kneeling before him. He was a king. Then, in another flicker, he was an old man, sitting by a fire, his hands weathered but at peace. Each vision showed him a different fate, a different Ragnar. A Ragnar who never left his time. A Ragnar who never took the axe. The Weaver King's voice whispered all around him. You were never meant to wield it. Let it go, and I will restore what was stolen. His wife's hand tightened around his. You could come home, she pleaded. Ragnar's heart pounded like war drums. He wanted to. But then he saw something else. A final vision. The Weaver King, standing victorious, his body a titanic mass of unraveling time, devouring history itself. Lyra. Hero. Zara. Gone. The world erased, rewritten in the king's image. Ragnar's grip tightened around the axe. He closed his eyes. And chose war. The rift cleaves time. Reality shattered back into focus. The battlefield returned, the Weaver King still standing before him. Ragnar raised the axe high. And swung. The blade sliced through the king's chest, but instead of blood, time itself ruptured. A massive rift exploded outward, a vortex of past and future colliding in violent chaos. The Weaver King screamed as his body began to unravel, his form caught between what was and what could have been. Zara's eyes went wide. Holy shit, Ragnar, do you even know what you just did? Hero caught his breath. He severed the king's connection to the Devourer. Lyra's gaze locked onto the growing rift. But at what cost? The sky fractured. Lightning, pulsing with infinite possibility, arced across the battlefield. Something was coming through. Something old. Something hungry. Ragnar looked at Lyra. Time to finish this. She nodded, eyes burning with resolve. The final battle had begun. Chapter 9, Shadows of the Cyber-Shogun. A clash of eras. The world lurched. One moment, Lyra, Ragnar, and Zara stood at the edge of the collapsing timeline rift, the Weaver King's screams fading into oblivion. The next, they were somewhere else. The air smelled of oil and incense, a fusion of ancient and hypermodern. The sky was dark, but neon kanji symbols floated across the horizon, advertising everything from hollow katanas to cybernetic augmentations. Zara groaned, rubbing her temples. Oh, great. We're in a damn cyberpunk shogunate now. Hiro, standing slightly apart, looked at his surroundings in shock. It was Japan. But not as he remembered it. Buildings loomed like jagged mountains, blending the elegance of Edo-era pagodas with the harshness of corporate skyscrapers. Red lanterns floated between streets, their glow barely illuminating the mist-choked alleyways below. Samurai in gleaming cybernetic armor patrolled the roads, their katanas replaced by plasma blades that crackled with every step. And above them all, high atop a palace forged of gold and steel, sat a throne. On that throne sat a warrior from Hiro's past. The Cyber-Shogun. Hiro's hand drifted to his katana. His voice was a whisper. Tadashi. The rise of the Cyber-Shogun. Zara's head snapped toward Hiro. You know this guy? Hiro's jaw clenched. He was my master, he said slowly. And my greatest enemy. Lyra exchanged glances with Ragnar. I assume there's a story there. Hiro didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the palace. Before anyone could react, the Cyber-Shogun's voice thundered across the city. Interlopers. The streets fell silent. Even the holograms flickered as if bowing to his will. From the palace gates, a battalion of cybernetic samurai descended. Their armor gleamed under the neon lights, their visor-like helmets reflecting static-ridden faces. Ragnar cracked his knuckles. Finally. I was getting bored. Lyra sighed. I hate when you say that. Zara pulled out her interface glove. Give me 30 seconds to hack their systems. She never got the chance. Because Hiro was already moving. He vanished in a blur of speed, his katana a streak of silver. And the war began. Blade against circuit. Hiro met the first cyber samurai head-on. Their plasma katanas clashed, sending sparks across the battlefield. The samurai fought with inhuman precision, their bodies augmented by technology Hiro could barely comprehend. But Hiro had something they didn't: a warrior's soul. His movements were fluid, precise. Every step, every strike, was a dance passed down through centuries. One samurai lunged. Hiro sidestepped and brought his blade down in a single stroke. The samurai's body froze, then split in half, its circuits sparking before collapsing. Ragnar bellowed a war cry and waded into battle, his Riftborn Axe carving through metal like butter. Lyra ducked behind cover, firing chrono pulses at approaching enemies. Zara, working from the shadows, hacked into their systems, disrupting their targeting. The battle raged through the city. And at its center, the Cyber-Shogun watched from his throne. A master's judgment. When the last cyber samurai fell, Hiro turned toward the palace. The massive steel gates groaned open, and the Cyber-Shogun descended the steps. He was taller than Hiro remembered, his body more machine than man. His face was hidden behind an Oni-like mask, glowing crimson. Hiro, the Shogun said, his voice layered with artificial distortion. Hiro's grip on his katana tightened. Tadashi. The Cyber-Shogun tilted his head. You should not have come. Neither should you. Hiro's voice was low, controlled. The Cyber-Shogun took another step forward. The old ways died long ago. You cling to ghosts. Ragnar snorted. You sure talk like a villain. Tadashi ignored him. His plasma blade ignited. This will be your final duel, Hiro. Hiro lowered into a battle stance. I wouldn't have it any other way. The duel. The fight was lightning and thunder, steel and fire. Hiro and Tadashi moved faster than the eye could track. Plasma and steel clashed, sending shockwaves through the palace grounds. Tadashi fought without hesitation, each strike precise and deadly. His cybernetic enhancements made him stronger, faster. But Hiro had something else. Determination. Every attack he deflected, every counter he delivered, was driven by a lifetime of discipline. He saw openings where others would have seen death. And in one perfect moment, he struck. His blade pierced Tadashi's armor, cutting deep. The Cyber-Shogun staggered. His voice crackled. Impossible. Hiro exhaled, stepping back. It's over. Tadashi looked at the sky. Then laughed. The sound was broken, metallic. You still don't understand, he said. Above them, the skies split open. And something vast and monstrous stepped through. The Time Devourer had arrived. The end of time begins. The Devourer's form was a mass of shifting timelines, an ever-changing storm of faces, battles, and futures unwritten. The city buckled under its presence. Buildings crumbled, neon lights flickered and died. Lyra's eyes widened. We're out of time. Zara's interface glowed with data. It's rewriting reality. Ragnar lifted his axe. Then let's rewrite it back. Hiro turned to Tadashi. For a long moment, the Cyber-Shogun said nothing. Then, with a flicker of something almost human in his eyes, he threw his plasma blade to Hiro. And this. Hiro caught the blade. And with the weight of centuries behind him, he charged into the storm. Chapter 10, The Devourer's Gambit. Time is breaking. The air screamed as the sky split apart. Lyra Voss stumbled backward, shielding her eyes from the unnatural glow that burst through the fracture in reality. Purple lightning crackled around the gaping wound in time, its energy distorting the world like a mirage. Then, the Devourer began to emerge. It was monstrous, shifting, infinite. Its form refused to settle. One moment it was a towering silhouette of tangled limbs and mechanical veins, the next it was a humanoid figure cloaked in flickering time distortions. Its face was an ever-changing mask of every version of itself that had ever existed. And then came the voices. I am the end of time. The words were spoken through her, vibrating in her skull, resonating through the core of her being. It wasn't just a voice, it was the weight of all time collapsing inward, a tide of history erasing itself in real time. Zara clutched her temples, wincing. It's breaking everything. Ragnar Ironhide spat into the dirt and raised his Riftborn Axe. Then let's make sure it stays broken. And with that, the final battle began. Ragnar versus the unfathomable. The Viking warlord charged first, sprinting across the ruined cityscape toward the Devourer's shifting form. His axe, infused with the power of 1,000 time rifts, glowed with primal energy. He leapt, swinging at what he assumed was its head, but in an instant, the creature rewound the moment. Ragnar suddenly found himself back where he started, his muscles aching as though he had charged and struck over and over, 100 times in a row. What in the bloody hell? Before he could react, the Devourer lashed out, its arm morphing into a jagged scythe of crystallized time itself. The blade sliced through Ragnar's side, sending a violent shockwave through his body. The Viking roared in pain but refused to fall. Blood dripped onto the shattered ground, and he grinned through the agony. You'll have to do better than that, beast. He lunged again. This time, as the Devourer attempted to rewind the moment, Zara struck. The hacker's counterattack. Zara had been analyzing the way time fractured around the Devourer, watching the distortions flicker like corrupted code. Every loop has a weak point, she muttered, fingers flying across the holographic display of her chrono gauntlet. She found it a microsecond of vulnerability between every reset. Gotcha. With a flick of her wrist, she hacked into the temporal stream just as the Devourer attempted to rewind Ragnar's movements again. Instead of reversing time, she locked it. The Devourer twitched, suddenly trapped in its own paradox. Ragnar's axe connected this time, it landed. A howl erupted from the creature as the blade sank deep into its form, carving through layers of stolen time. The wound rippled through its body, unraveling the stolen centuries that made up its existence. For a brief moment, it weakened. And then Hiro struck. The samurai's final stand. Hiro didn't waste the opening. He had spent his life training for the perfect strike. With one fluid motion, he unsheathed his katana, a blade forged in 1603, reforged in 2500, and now wielded in the end of time itself. His breath slowed. His mind cleared. And then he moved. To an outside observer, Hiro seemed to vanish, his form becoming a blur of motion as he sliced through the air. His katana slashed across time itself, cutting through past and future at once. The Devourer shrieked. Hiro landed behind it, his sword dripping with paradox. He turned just in time to see the wound he had inflicted spread. The Devourer was collapsing in on itself. For the first time, they had it on the defensive. And then, everything went wrong. The Devourer's true plan. As its form flickered and shattered, the Devourer stopped resisting. Instead of retaliating, it let go. A deep, echoing laugh resonated through the battlefield. Did you think you could slay me? You have only given me what I need. Zara's eyes widened in horror as her interface flashed a warning. Lyra. It's using the paradox against us. Lyra's chrono gauntlet flared red as her worst fear was confirmed. The more damage they dealt, the more the Devourer absorbed the raw entropy of collapsing time. They weren't killing it. They were fueling it. A pulse of energy exploded outward. Hero was caught first. His body froze mid-motion, his expression locked in grim determination as his form began to rewind. No. Lyra screamed. Hero's existence unraveled, pulled backward through time, his body splitting into echoes of himself from every battle he had ever fought. And then, in the next second, he was gone. A looped fragment of time. A memory, forever repeating. Ragnar cursed, clutching his axe. We need a way to stop this thing for good. Lyra took a deep breath. There was a way. But it meant sacrificing everything. The Weaver's Gambit. Lyra's hands trembled as she accessed the Chrono Core's failsafe. The paradox loop, she whispered. Zara's head snapped toward her. No. Absolutely not. It's the only way, Lyra said. If I activate it, we can trap the Devourer in a closed time loop, erase it from history. Zara's voice cracked. You'll erase yourself too. Lyra smiled softly. I was always meant to. Ragnar grunted. This isn't right. There has to be another. No, Lyra said firmly. This was always the answer. I built the Chrono Core. And now I have to be the one to shut it down. She turned to Zara. Take care of time, she whispered. Then, before anyone could stop her, she activated the paradox loop. The sacrifice. The battlefield froze. The Devourer screamed, its form unraveling as time bent in on itself. The sky fractured, 1,000 timelines collapsing at once. And then, Lyra